Greetings, everybody. Welcome to our fourth discipline of the Celebration of Discipline, our fall sermon series. We are on the final of what Richard Foster calls the inward disciplines. It's on study, the discipline of study. So we'll find out what that is about. Our scripture reading for today is the Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 4, verses 4 through 9. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. As for the things that you have learned and received and heard and noticed in me, do them, and the God of peace will be with you. The word of God for the people of God. So this week is the last, as I mentioned, of the inward, what Foster calls the inward disciplines. We started with meditation, which is an attentive quieting of the mind. And then we talked about prayer, which is an honest exhalation, I guess you could say, of our inner life to God. And then last week we talked about fasting, which is a way for us to help control appetites and our physical desires. But this week, then, we talk about the discipline of study, which is used to focus the mind and make good decisions about how we direct our attention. So next week, we will begin what Foster calls the outward disciplines, where we will talk about things like simplicity and solitude and silence and what these kinds of outward activities can do to frame our spiritual experience and give us, again, more tools in our toolbox for how we're growing the gardens of our souls. So in some ways, last week was kind of an easier topic for us in understanding the goodness and the dangers of some dimensions of our inner life. We all have desires and appetites, and these generally stem from things that are needed and good: food, sex, and things. We also all know that these things can get out of hand relatively easily, and that people can and do fall into pits when the appetites take more control over our behavior than they should. These are very common troubles for people, and everyone has to wrestle with the appetites in a significant way at some point in their life. But this week, though, we're talking about the mind itself and the intellect, and yet a very similar pattern will emerge to the appetites. It's just a lot harder for us to realize it or recognize it because our minds are full of thoughts all the time, right? And even to think about the mind and to think about the intellect requires us to use the mind and the intellect. And so it can be difficult to sort of separate ourselves from our own thoughts. And it's like if all of us, if you're paying attention to what I'm saying, and you're using your minds and your intellects to do so, you're thinking about what I am saying. You're thinking about it. But what I want us to do is think about our thinking. But to think about our thinking requires us to think. You see, it's like a Dr. Seuss puzzle or something. If you wear glasses, right, you see everything through the lenses of your glasses. And I'm asking you to do is to look at your glasses, right? Well, if you can't see well enough that you need glasses, it's hard to look at your glasses without the glasses. You see this is the kind of quandary we're in. But that's the task. That's the task we're up for it, I'm sure. We're using our minds and our intellects all the time in our kind of waking world to understand what's going on around us, our context, and to kind of evaluate the situation we're in and to make choices about how to act in it. From the moment that we wake up and shake off that grogginess, our intellectual systems are coming online, and the rest of the day the mind is moving. It's moving. Unless you do some kind of meditation or other kind of practice which intentionally gives the mind a break to quiet down while you're awake, it's moving all day long otherwise. And the point of all this is just to say the following. It's very difficult, but vital for us to understand that you are not your thoughts. And that's difficult to separate it out, but you are not your thoughts. Just like you are not your appetites, right? We'd never define ourselves purely by our appetites, but in the same way, we are also not our thoughts. Okay, so that one is, the appetites is far easier to accept because they oftentimes conflict with what we think. Like, I probably shouldn't have that ice cream, but maybe I will, right? And so we feel sometimes more plagued by our appetites because they drive us to do things that we think we shouldn't at times. But what we don't realize as easily is that there's a reverse to that picture, and that is that we can become plagued by our thoughts in the same way. And your thoughts can be just as enslaving or more so even than your appetites. You can be consumed by your thoughts. Carl Jung once said something like, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. Think about that for a second. People don't have ideas, ideas have people. That's something to think about. But the mind is just as dangerous as your appetites in terms of our spiritual life. We just don't realize it because it's our mind that's making that evaluation. It has to be self-critical in some sense. But the reality is you don't always trust your thoughts. We don't. And that is a very healthy stance to take. Your thoughts are not always reliable. And I don't mean just in the sense of I can't remember this or that fact or, the phone number or whatever it might be. I mean thoughts that are not leading you in a good direction for your life, for your soul, right? I mean, anytime you've gone with your gut or, with your intuition about some decision, rather than with what you think, you're making a choice to not go with your mind. You see, but that alone introduces a third thing inside of you somehow, right? So you, whatever you is, has to make a choice between what you think on the one hand and what your gut is telling you, or your instincts, right? To say that there's two kind of voices. And then there's something else, a third thing that's deciding between the two. Right? Something else is making the decision. It's not really your thoughts and it's not really your guts, but there's something else there. You are making a choice. And that should be at least some indication that we are not our thoughts. We can evaluate our own thoughts. Okay, so we have one powerful motivational force within us. That's that underneath our emotions, feelings, desires, that sort of swelling under our gut feeling, our heart, that kind of place. And those are good, but they can get out of control. And so we use fasting as a way to help keep them in place. Okay, so, and now we have another power, center of power within us, another motivational force within us that we're talking about this week. And those are our thoughts. And those are good, but they can get out of control. And so we use study as a way to help keep them in place. You see where we're going here? You are not your emotions. You are not your thoughts. You are something deeper that judges and decides. And so the cultivation of wisdom is when the decider in you continually or consistently makes good decisions. Decisions that help you orient yourself toward God. That's what we're about. So this is what both fasting does for the appetites and what study does for the thoughts. So what is study, and how does it help us keep our thoughts from running out of control? Well, the discipline of study, just broadly speaking, is about intentionally directing your attention. Intentionally directing your attention. So your attention, you can say, is the primary interface, the connection that you have between your mind and the outside world. So whatever we're focusing on, whatever our attention is on, there's all sorts of systems running in the background that are going on in our brains, but our minds are generally engaged in some. If you're reading a book, if you're listening to someone talk, if you're watching a TV show or something, whatever you're paying attention to is what is associated with what's going on in your mind. It's what you feed your mind. your mind then functions and generates and bubbles away at whatever it is you're feeding it. So if you're paying attention to a book, your thoughts will correspond to whatever it is you are reading. If you find your mind wandering from the book, then you're not really paying attention to the book. Your mind is thinking about something else, and you're just reading along, and you don't remember what you're reading, right? You can only have it in one place, it seems like. If you're paying attention to a football game or to a bird that's flying around or to a friend or to a pork chop or whatever it is your attention is on, your thoughts will correspond to it. So this is why advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? We all shake our heads at commercials and say, oh, they don't do anything to me. If they didn't do anything, people wouldn't pay money to do it, right? It works. Tricking or enticing people, let's say, to pay attention to some product or another works. That works. Remember, I always found this hilarious. My brother told me this. In the TV industry, the content of a program is the commercials. That's what, in the TV industry, the content are the commercials. You see, the filler is whatever is drawing you in to watch the program, whether it's a game or sports game or a TV show or whatever it is. That's the filler. That's the garbage they would rather get rid of. If they could just have you sit down and watch a half hour of commercials, then that would be their ideal thing, because they're making money on the commercials. So their content is the commercials, and the filler is whatever it is you're tuning in to see. So that they're using to capture your attention. And that's an interesting word. I find that just fascinating. So the modern world has become a constant, especially with all our screens now, has become a constant fight for your attention. That's what they're really after, right? Like, for heaven's sakes, you can't even pump gas anymore without some garbage blaring at you trying to capture your attention. And I love the verbs that we've cropped up around attention too. I'm not sure if they're intentional or not, or where they come from, but they make sense. We pay attention to things. And that's exactly right. We are giving something in return for what our minds are corresponding to. We're paying attention. And our thoughts are generated from that payment. So our thoughts, whatever we pay for is what our minds are going to pay attention to. And we capture each other's attention. So it's like a trap. That's kind of true too. It turns out that you have some control, though, over what you pay attention to. I mean, I guess that's kind of obvious. And therefore, you have some control over what your thoughts are going to be, what the thoughts are corresponding to. And and that's obvious. I guess it's really obvious, but we're affected by the things we think about. You see, and the more that we commit our attention to something, the more we find ourselves corresponding to that thing. A correspondence happens, right? If you're interested in golf and you continually commit your attention to golf, you'll find yourself thinking about golf more and desiring to do things or to try things or to learn things relative to what you are committing your attention to. I mean, on some level, that's perfectly obvious to all of us, but for some reason, we choose to ignore the dark side of that pattern, right? So constantly paying attention to angry talking heads on the TV shouting at each other or being intentionally provocative will also drive your thoughts on angry things. You will become angrier. Constantly paying attention to horrible things will open you to horrible thoughts. You see, Nietzsche's famous warning was true. Beware of staring too long into the abyss, for the abyss is staring back. That's true. There's something true about that. Christina's uncle was, my wife Christina, was a police officer for many years and involved for some set of those years with child abuse cases, which was horrible. And it was really hard on him. And you could tell it just takes a toll to see so much abuse and suffering, and it breaks you over time if you're not being very careful, if you're not intentionally countering the thoughts in some way. So And people will argue back, well, I see commercials and I see murders on TV or on video games or whatever. I'm not running out to buy things, or I'm not murdering people. And even, and that's true, right? It's not a one-to-one correspondence. It's not like you're being brainwashed. I guess that would be the absurd end of that argument. But just because you have exposed yourself, right, and just because you've exposed yourself, I guess, to negative things and even have negative thoughts, does not mean that you'll necessarily act on them. But look, bring it back to the appetites. If you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to get yourself in order, let's say, and you're sitting around in a Dairy Queen all day, that's not going to help. You see what I mean? Like that's not a it's not a good strategy. Likewise, if you're trying to keep your mind in a good place and that inner life in a good place, paying attention to garbage, and garbage means like things that are making you upset, things that are making you angry, intentionally that is, things that are making you afraid or anxious, right? All of that stuff, paying attention to that garbage is not going to make it easier. It's not going to it's not necessarily going to submarine you. You're not going to fall into a bubbling pit or anything necessarily, but why do it? So, well, I know why you do it. It's the same reason we crane our necks whenever we go by an accident on the highway. We're attracted to that sort of thing, and TV knows it, and newspapers know it, and so they take advantage of that. So they continually jack up the volume. They jack up the fear, the anxiety, whatever, because it sells. You're going to click on it. You're going to watch it. You're going to get obsessed with it. And that's not good. It's not good. And so if you keep going in that path, and this is sort of the extreme version, just like with appetites, you can fall into serious addictions where even, where fasting needs to be just one part of a broader strategy to help with whatever the addictions are. You can become addicted in your thoughts as well, right? Or possessed by them is sometimes how they're referred to. To be possessed is to be absolutely captured by an idea, right? So just like our appetites can enslave us, you can be enslaved to ideas, to your thoughts, which is much more common today than it used to be. There's a lot of what's called ideological possession today, where we seem to be where you find people who are utterly incapable, it seems like, of seeing anything from a different perspective than our own. And once we are convinced that it's our ideas that are good and their ideas that are evil, watch out, because that's when the knives come out. That's when things start getting violent. And it's happening. It's happened over and over in history. It's happened in religious systems and it's happened in political systems, right? And it always ends up with a lot of unnecessary suffering. And it's on the rise today. And it's another good reason for the discipline of study. So what is it? The discipline of study really is quite simple. I mean, it's really simple, really. It just fits exactly with our passage. Do what you need to do to keep a focus on what Paul says, that which is true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable. If there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, he says, think about those things. Keep those things in mind. Seek those things, right? So like Bible study is sort of the classic example, and it's a good place to start, but it's not always, right? It's not always, if you're struggling with the Bible, if it's something that you may have to start somewhere else. You may have to start somewhere and lead yourself into it. Or find people who can be compassionate and gentle with the Bible, because the Bible can be brutal at times as well. And our adult small groups that we meet after church every other week, we have an adult small group that meets, and you're invited, by the way, if you happen to be at church. We talk about things like this, disciplines of fasting and study, and we try to keep our minds on the edifying things. But the point is that it's time spent paying attention to that which is good, right? Read books that are edifying and that lift you up, right? Or if you're not into reading, that's fine. Listen to podcasts that are edifying and lift you up, or watch shows that inspire and encourage you if you can find any. Pay attention to nature if that's your thing, right? Spend time pondering the beauty around you when you're out there casting the line in, or walking across the green if you're golfing or whatever it might be. But pay attention to things that you are interested in that lift you up, that make you feel good at the end, and not like you just need to take a shower or something. Turn off things that are continually making you angry or upset, or at least limit them, right? Especially if your work kind of continually puts you in contact with terrible things like Christina's uncle. But the point is to be intentional with what you feed your mind. And that's study. That's a discipline of study that'll help us to keep our thoughts in some control. There's more to be said of this. These are just skipping rocks off the pond of these disciplines, but that's a start. So if you're interested in getting the book, Richard Foster's book, I do still have a couple extra copies. Just let me know and I can get one to you. And thank you. Have a great week.